Okay, my name is Doreen Ludwig. I'm from Reading, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Philadelphia, moved to Reading thinking it was a bucolic community. We bought a log cabin on 2 acres with a pond, which was fully paid for. It's appraised at $250,000. I've been with my husband for 23 years, since I was 19. We had worked together and saved. We were both mid-income people. I was a secretary, he was a union member, and we saved everything. Nothing fancy, worked on the house ourselves, worked on the car. So we had paid off our second house, which is that log cabin, and we had $60,000 in a bank account. There was a $150,000 annuity from the union and a pension on top of that. I had 2 children, and the abuse escalates. He has very traditional feelings about how women are, and I stayed home with the children because we could afford it. But he wanted to tell me how to raise the kids, and I think there was a level of, he was upset that he wasn't the nurturer. I breastfed, little things like that. He would occasionally hit me. The second baby she's like me, I have ADD. So the second child does also, and they're born very intense. So she would scream a lot, so I held her all the time, and he didn't like that. So one time I took a shower when it was hot. We didn't have air conditioning. We were saving again. And he brought the baby up to the bathroom, and when I got out of the shower, he slapped me in the ear because I had told him to take the baby downstairs because her sound was reverberating. I just needed one little break. Generally, an abuser uses different levels of control. So my husband was always very successful at just putting me down and being the ruler. And I wanted a traditional, I guess, experience also. So I allowed him some of that. But when I started to challenge it, then he would get physical. And his favorite way was putting his hands around my neck. My husband's 6'2", almost 200 pounds, and I'm 5'3", about 125. So one time when he was putting his hands around me, and he was having a reaction because we were running a little late to go on a visit with his family, so it wasn't even an emergency. I scratched his forearms, and that actually stopped him from a while, but he used it to, like, look what she did to me. Anyway, I noticed that he was making it look like it was me, the one with the problem. And when his mother died, I assessed his parents' relationship and realized this is what they had done to her, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to be ostracized and old and alone. His mother died of pancreatic cancer in the back room of her house. She suffered alone, and when we went to visit his father, he said, "Oh, she cries all the time. I can't stand it. It's hard on me. I can't stand living with her crying all the time." And here she was dying of cancer. And I just looked at my life and realized I didn't want to die alone. So I got a support group and saw a lawyer, got the documents, did everything logically. And I filed for divorce from my abusive husband, just thinking I actually realized that I could give him the house and then the kids would not lose this beautiful atmosphere. So I wanted to do things nicely. My lawyer told me I could. I did get some support, but I proceeded to finance legal fees and things on the credit cards. At PBS.org has a very good article that a professor has researched when they changed the bankruptcy laws. The credit cards are set up to get people into these circumstances. They give you a lot of 0% things, and you think it's a short term because, of course, the divorce, there's tons of money. There's over $200,000 that is legally mine. And so it's going to be short term. It's going to get settled. I'll pay off the credit cards before they go over 0. That's not until the fall. And they immediately whack up to 31%. So we went to what is called a custody evaluator. What I have since found out is that he is appointed to deny the abuse. That's his sole purpose, and to give custody to my husband. I know this because His report is submitted as a court record saying defendant's exhibit number 1. It is underlined only in favor of my husband, and he is repeatedly referred to as the expert and witness. So systematically you're being put through the system and impoverished, and you get to the point where 1 month I got a $5,000 bill, and for me, who is home with children, I was planning on going back to Westchester University and getting a degree in journalism and getting my life together so that in 2 years I would not have to rely on support or anything from him. And there was more than enough money for me to do that. But I was put through a court system that denied me, and I have court records, I was denied to go to school. I was told I had to work full-time in order to support the custody evaluator, who is giving counseling at $150 per hour. The goal is to get me into his long-term counseling racket. And they have to force me to get a full-time job so that he can bill my husband's and my insurance at $75. So I found out that this racket was going on, and I filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania State Department on his ethics 2 years ago. I researched the code of ethics. I headed every heading, rights and responsibilities and things, and I filed on a very legitimate complaint. I think the only thing he wasn't doing ethically was torturing animals, testing on animals, but he was violating every other ethic. I had a clinical doctor of psychology who was treating me for the abuse. She wrote a 12-page report. We researched, we had Lundy Bancroft's things and many other pieces that show that women with abuse test a certain way in custody evaluations. So she wrote a very factual, research-oriented 12-page report that was not permitted to be in the testimony. My custody trial was in March of 2006. 2 months prior to that, my lawyer got a document together and filed for what is called an interim a petition for interim disbursement, which is part of the marital assets. So they subjected me to several hours of testifying. I even showed that my husband had taken all that money out of the bank, $39,000 he was allowed to claim. He has no idea what happened to it. And the judge ruled that there was no reason for me to get funds, even though he knew that I needed funds for defense, for the rights of my children, and for expert witnesses. I was denied. I was devastated that day. And I kept questioning, how did this guy get appointed? So I was already doing a lot of work on my own. The lawyer said to me, you cannot file against this custody evaluator. Do not do it. He's in court every day. He's a friend of the court. And then I found out he let a hearing happen without me knowing it, and him and I were yelling. We went to the hearing, and this custody evaluator, whose name is Dr. Timothy Ring, showed up, and the two lawyers were over in the corner, and you sit in a waiting room, it's decrepit, watching TV Land. You're all dressed up, hair straight and everything. You don't even get to see anybody though. And your abuser is staring you down with his sister. So I turned sideways and hung my feet over the chair and did my coursework and did not look at him the whole time. And my lawyer came up and said, you need to say hello to Dr. Ring. And Dr. Ring walked in there and said, hey, Chet, how you doing? Good guy. And goes over to the lawyers and they go, oh, you just got back from Tuscany, didn't you? Oh, yes, I was there for a week. Oh, you have the best tan. And they were gushing all over him. And my lawyer was telling him how he had been some other place in the Mediterranean. And I sat there for 3 hours and waited to give witness and never was allowed. My psychologist was called on the telephone and basically berated, trying to substantiate that I have a mental illness. They've actually called me schizophrenic. I have ADD, and that's a diagnosis of my psychologist. ADD has never been tested on an MMPI. So there are behaviors that I admit to. I tend to go off and give a lot of background. These are very good skills that work very well for somebody who writes. I write better than I communicate. I can edit my writing. and I wanted to go back to school to write. So I was devastated. I got rid of the lawyer and I called legal aid. They can only represent 20% of the people. In custody, you have no right to legal representation. Since the Reagan administration, legal aid has been continually cut. But the lady was very nice. Her name is Val West. She was very kind. She had lunch with me for an hour and a half. I probably could get her in trouble. So it's all right. I was plugging her. She's been very good. She agreed to have lunch with me for an hour and a half, and she gave me some basic advice where I could find this memorandum. I was supposed to file something to say what my trial was going to be about. And I typed it up, and she sat with me and explained some trial stuff, gave me a nice trial book. So that was all of the legal training I had to prepare for those 2 months with no money and the stress of having to work. And I was taking 3 classes at school, and also having your children. And I had I didn't overindulge the kids, but we had a nice lifestyle, dance classes and, you know, McDonald's or just little things. So that creates a tremendous amount of stress because meanwhile the credit card people I was paying the credit card bills at that point. It got to the point where I couldn't pay them anymore at the 31%, but I was maintaining them. It was costing me $700 a month to do that because all my legal fees were on the credit cards. And at that point they were $17,000. That was my financial limit. When I arrived in court that day, the same judge who did not give me funds did not permit me to present one exhibit. I had at least 26 proving that my husband was abusive. He did not permit me to have the testimony of this Dr. Ring's intern, who is the person I spent most of the time with, who I had called on the telephone and who told me Dr. Ring was highly unethical, did this to 4 other women. She would testify that she heard my husband say he backhanded me and I deserved it. The report was written that if there's any abuse in the relationship, I believe it was self-defense. Mother has a constellation of mental health issues. That's like that's not even a DSM diagnosis, which is your official psychological. So it was written basically to say I was mentally ill, although I'm not. I have transcript of the judge. My psychologist came in and testified for 3 hours, and the judge basically berated her and tried to get her to say I was mentally ill, which she would not do. I have that transcript. The best thing about representing yourself, and it is emotionally difficult, is that you know what's there. You know the record. You have to read it word for word. You cry over it. You say, how was this done to me? But you know it. Nobody can take that away from you. So in some manner, if you have the skills, and I do have basic writing and researching skills, which was a help. If you have the skills, and I type 100 words a minute, it's the only thing that keeps up with my talking or my brain. If you have the skills, you might want to consider it for that reason. You will know everything. We as women need to start figuring out how they're doing this, what court procedures they're using, and how they're getting away with doing this. We need it documented. It's so documented in my case. These are crimes they're doing. If you look, your state has a crime code. It has a custody code. These are legislative laws, and they set the standard for what the judges are supposed to be doing. Most states' custody law says that abuse has to be a factor when they determine custody. I found all this out by doing my own work. No lawyer is going to tell you this stuff. He is there to try to work out something and to let the judge do what the judge wants to do without causing trouble. So when you do it yourself, you're free. Nobody can take your bar license from you. So you can do anything you want.
Well,
Of course, you want to stay with the truth, but you can bring up the evidence of abuse. The lawyer will sometimes say, oh, no, that's not relevant. I subpoenaed all the school employees. My lawyer wouldn't have done that. The lawyer told me, well, generally you talk to these people ahead of time. I don't have anything to hide. I subpoenaed anybody I could think of. They were all denied by the judge, but meanwhile, the record, which is all your court documents and your transcripts, it proves that the judge denied me due process. Due process is your exhibits, your witnesses, and cross-examination. That's a big one. They did not permit me to cross-examine the custody evaluator, but he was permitted to put his report into the record, and a whole decision was based solely on his recommendation to the judge, even though a whole day of transcripts and not permitted evidence and witnesses proves that my husband is abusive to me beyond a doubt. So when you represent yourself, you know it's being done on purpose. If you're in there with your lawyer and you start to get the feeling that things aren't adding up correctly, you might want to consider doing it yourself, because at least you'll know. You're going to lose anyway. At least you lose and still have your money, and you're documenting. You must think of everything as documenting. It's there. Everything proves that they are purposely taking money from women. This is welfare money that's paying for fathers to be better fathers, to get legal counseling, to learn how to manipulate the court system. But they won't give a woman welfare. They won't give a woman funds to go educate herself. My husband's paid his lawyer $70,000. This is my children's college education. I worked hard for it. They have a legal obligation to settle this case within a reasonable amount of time. There's a Pennsylvania law that custody needs to be settled in 6 months. It's 1915.4, and they're not following it. And when you bring it up to them, they pretend you know nothing. And if you call a lawyer and you say to him, well, here's this little law, a rule of court it is. It's not law. There's a difference. It's one little paragraph, 3 sentences. Custody is to be settled within 6 months or dropped, and they're not doing it. The lawyers didn't even know this existed. They'd say, oh, how about that? But nobody follows that anyway. That's the kind of legal representation you get from a lawyer. When you do it yourself, you put it out there. You say to the judge, 1915.4 requires you to finish this in 6 months. Use it on appeal if you have to. My friend's appeal was overturned because of that rule. She kept bringing it up. The rules. Then there are state statutes, which I alluded to before. Legislative law that says they have to use abuse in custody. Consolidated statutes, they're called in Pennsylvania. Most of them are on the internet. Find out what your rights are. When you do it yourself, you see the rights. This legislative law is the basis for what the court is supposed to be doing. The court is permitted to have court rules. They're under that. But the rules in the Pennsylvania Constitution, they're not allowed to write a rule that takes away any other right. Meaning, if you have a legislative right to have abuse in custody determinations, it's a due process violation not to do it. So like I said, then there's a Pennsylvania Constitution, which gives you rights of appeal and things, and above that you have your United States Constitution, due process and right of appeal, that type of thing. That's what you learn when you learn it yourself. My feeling was they weren't going to let me educate myself. I took it from them. I took a year off. I can't go to school. I was finagling bills and it just got too much. And I learned the law. They can't take that from you, no matter what they take.